The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to another episode of Speaking with the Senator. I'm Senator Kevin Avard. I serve District 12 here in New Hampshire. And as most of you may know, lately there's this whole talk about the critical race theory, HB544, House Bill 544, and what it means to you as citizens in New Hampshire, your children in their education, the controversy behind it, and the bill to say that, you know, this really isn't a necessary or good thing for indoctrinating or teaching, some would say, your children. So I invited the sponsor of HB 544, Representative Keith Ammon, and he served in a few terms, and so we wanted to have just a little conversation about what this bill is all about, why the controversy, and maybe give us a little bit of insight as to why he actually brought the bill forward. So with that, Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here.
And you've served a couple of terms now.
Yeah, this is my third term.
Third term?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what committees do you serve on?
In the past, I served on municipal and county, and then science, tech, and energy, and then currently it's commerce. I'm the clerk of commerce, and
okay, wow.
That deals with banking and insurance and consumer protection.
One thing about being a rep or a senator, you actually get to learn a lot about a lot of different topics.
Yeah, that's right.
Not necessarily going to be an expert on them, but being in municipal, that's pretty much germane as to that in education as to what we're going to be talking a little bit about.
Yeah, so that was my first term, but so a previous term I was on municipal, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, we had a guest the previous week, Mr. Dan Richards, and he was concerned that local municipalities or local school boards or parent teachers organizations were having secret meetings about this critical race theory. And so when he asked questions about it, he was shouted down. And so that was kind of reason why I wanted to bring you here, to basically talk a little bit about it. You're the sponsor, the prime sponsor of House Bill 544. It's in the budget at this point right now. What was the reason? Why did you, this was your idea to bring it up. What was the cause of that?
Yeah, the great question. So we filed bills back in November. This bill came actually from a university professor in one of our state universities. I've mentioned that several times. I get quizzed on who is that person. They want to remain anonymous because they fear backlash and retribution in their place of employment. The bill idea was based on an executive order that Trump put out in September of 2020. So a good portion of the bill borrows from that. And the executive order was instructing the federal government, you know, it's the executive branch, the head of the executive branch issuing instructions to the executive branch. Mm-hmm. That's what an executive order is supposed to be.
Right.
And it was to not fund certain types of divisive concepts with taxpayer money and really indoctrinate people on these issues. The genesis of Trump's executive order had to do with, I believe it was Los Alamos National Laboratory. So this is, nuclear engineers in the federal government. They took employees and they separated them into groups, and they made the white employees apologize to the non-white employees and do these exercises and, capitulate for being born, a certain race. And that's kind of what the impetus was behind Trump's executive order. And then public university professor in our state picked up on it and introduced the idea for the bill. And, I knew it was controversial when I put it in, but I don't shy away from controversy, right, as you know, Kevin.
You're a liberty-loving Republican.
Yeah, I'd like to, we need to have these conversations, and that's kind of our job as legislators, is to take on the difficult conversation.
One of the things that surprised me with the previous interview is the fact that he was kind of sideswiped, Mr. Richardson, or Richards, in that he just asked questions about it, and there was a trained interrupter,
Right.
and in secret meetings, and when he was just at, what is CTR? What is critical race theory? Why is this being taught to the kids? Can I learn a little bit more about it? And as he's asking these questions, he's being shouted down by somebody who claimed to be trained on how to interrupt.
Right.
And I find that disturbing, which means basically you're not allowed to express any type of interest or comments unless you're granted permission, and by the elite, if you will. So what does the bill do? What does HB
So
544?
the bill actually does 4 things. I have some notes here just so I don't miss anything. But it prohibits the state and its political subdivisions, as well as educational institutions that receive state funds from teaching or instructing students or employees, and this is the key part, to adopt or believe this list of divisive concepts. And here's a couple of them. One is that one race or sex is superior to another race or sex. So we wouldn't want to use taxpayer money to teach people that one race or sex is superior to another race or sex, or that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. There's a list of things, that are pretty easy for individuals to agree on.
Right.
But the problem is critical race theory uses these concepts to kind of indoctrinate people. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida had probably the best line. They want to use taxpayer money to teach kids to hate each other and to hate our country. And why would we use taxpayer dollars to do that?
Well, obviously we don't want that, and we've taken years to just get over the 60s and the 70s and all the racial tension that was going on back then.
Yeah, so what's interesting, critical race theorists, they don't think the civil rights movement went far enough. So we're familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King's statement that we want to be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. They think that didn't accomplish the goals. They think they need to go further and actually use racism and sexism to get their agenda pushed forward.
What agenda? What agenda is this?
If you look at the history of critical race theory, it goes back to the 60s and the 70s. It comes out of these critical theories, and it has Marxist underpinnings. So, for instance, Marx separated society into the capitalists and the labor class, right?
Proletariats and
Right. So it's a tactic of Marxism. I mean, Mao separated the society into the red and the black classes, right? And pitted them against each other. So what critical race theory does is it borrows from these Marxist concepts, but uses race. It racializes everything. It looks at society through a racial lens. And what they're saying is that our country and all the institutions that support it were founded on racism and designed to perpetuate racism. And therefore, the only solution is to completely dismantle our institutions. And if you think that sounds hyperbolic, just think about what happened in major cities in the last year, where you have these young people burning down police stations, burning down parts of the city, toppling statues. Those kids were raised on this stuff, and that's what you get from this type of indoctrination.
Well, I think that's what the testimony of this other gentleman said as well, Mr. Richardson's, that they were pointing out that the Constitution was the genesis of the racism, where we know in the preamble we're all created in the image of God. We're all created equal and endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights or unalienable rights. And that being said, that set the stage for the future for everybody to be treated equal. And speaking of that, we're hearing these phrases of social equity instead of social equality. And I think there is a difference. And I think that's one of the things that really needs to be teased out as far as our understanding. What are we talking about here? Because we're hearing in Senate discussions, in some of our debates, that we need social equity. Well, that sounds good. It sounds like it's honoring people, but what it's it's saying is that it needs to be an equal outcome for everybody.
Right.
In other words, a classless society.
What does that remind you of?
Oh, well, that's definitely Marxism, but
Yeah.
can anybody show me in history where we've ever had a successful classless society?
No.
There's always an elite. There's always an elite, and the elite turns into tyranny. And instead of promoting the 14th Amendment, which is equal application under the law, this seems to undermine it. So you put this person in a class, this person in a class, and they become the thesis and the antithesis to the struggle. And we have this social struggle. And it's as though you're pulling off a scab and you're pointing the finger at each other, and everybody's at each other. And then, of course, somebody comes in who caused the problem to write in and say, I'm the answer.
Right.
You will listen to me, which is the form of tyranny. And that's the genesis of it. So you're basically saying, look, in this bill, everybody's to be treated equal.
Right.
And we're not to look at the white, the yellow, the red, the black, the shades of color, because we have multicultural people in our classrooms, children in our classrooms. We should be accepting everybody equally.
That's the promise of America.
That
and,
is.
And we're allowing a small vocal group of people to kind of inject this division in our society and leverage it for political gain.
Well, it's small. I mean, there seems to be a unified group of people. I noticed up in Concord during the election that everybody was voting for Bernie. Well, Bernie. Well, Bernie's a socialist.
Right.
That's the next.
Well, I guess when I say small, there's a group of elites who understand what's going on, and then there's a larger group of people that just kind of go with the flow. They hear the word equity, it sounds really good.
It does.
And they just go along with it without really understanding the agenda behind it.
What are other points of the bill?
Yeah, so it talks about, you can go online and read off all 10 of these listed.
But you got 10?
Yeah, there's 10, but they're all of the same vein, right? So
Yep.
an individual's moral character is not necessarily determined by his or her race or sex, right? So we shouldn't teach that because you were born a certain way, that your moral character is a function of how you were born.
Let me just tap into that a little bit.
Right.
So if you're teaching morals, you're teaching religion. You're not
That's true.
teaching science.
Right.
There's no science out there that has a moral basis. They teach facts. They teach this plus this equals this, or this is our observation, and as due to our observation, this happens in pure science. But once you add that moral compass to it, that moral part of it, now you're teaching a religion, and you're undermining the foundation, basically, of what made this country great in the beginning. There are different variations of it, but this basically undermines that.
It undermines individualism, which is a core. It's a core value of our country. What it says is that if you belong to a group because you were born a certain way, and therefore you have collective guilt, you should feel guilty because of something that someone did that happened to look like you 200 years ago, and you should feel guilty and absolve yourself continually of that sin that you didn't actually commit because it wasn't you that did it.
And that, again, is the moral standard. So if you look into biblical principles, there in the Old Testament, we were told that the children should not be punished for the sins of the father. That is a moral standard laid down by biblical principles. And so that is one moral standard.
Mm-hmm.
This is another, which counters that. And it puts into bondage people for other people's actions that you had nothing to do with.
Right. And again, it goes against, individual liberty is what underpins
Our foundation.
our foundation.
Yeah.
But to a Marxist, they want to get rid of that, right? They want to discredit. They want to discredit what the founding fathers wrote down, and they're not doing it by attacking the ideas. They're doing it by attacking the men. Because those men weren't perfect, then anything they wrote down is imperfect, and therefore we should throw it out the window.
And if you look at history, if you're any type of a student of history, and you'll see that the cultures have changed, the dynamics have changed. You can go from one culture to another culture throughout history, and to judge one in a different period of time against another, you're not playing on. You're not, number one, you're not being honest.
Yeah.
As far as because their nomenclature, their language, their whole traditions took generations to develop, and it seems very disingenuous to hold one culture against another culture morals, because it's moving sand. It's a moving goalpost.
Yeah, and it seems like it's accelerating. I mean, if you think President Obama was against same-sex marriage only a decade ago, right? I mean, it seems like this time period is being compressed, right? So you use gender-specific pronouns today, Kevin. 5 years from now, they could turn on the video and say,
Look at you. Look what you said.
Look what he said.
Right.
Or they said, sorry.
They said, yeah. So, and that's what's happening. And it's like, as though we're living in 1984 in real time.
Right, right.
You know, we're pulling out that little brick in the wall and writing beautiful words that we've never heard before, and writing them in a book so that we can treasure those words, putting it back in the wall, and hopefully nobody ever sees that we've learned a new word.
Yeah,
you know, it's the taking down of our communication, and it's amazing how those people figured this out.
Yeah,
in the 50s. You know,
right.
So what else? What else is going on?
Yeah. So what the bill doesn't do, I mean, this is probably as important as what it does do, because what the left tries to do is create this like false image of what legislation. Like, think about the Georgia voting law reforms, right? They completely distorted what they actually did, to the point where companies and Major League Baseball pulled out of the state, and and went to states that had stricter voting laws. So, it doesn't make any sense. But so what 544 doesn't do, it doesn't ban discussing or teaching about history. That's what they're saying. You can't discuss history. Like, for instance, you can't discuss slavery or women's suffrage or the divisive concepts themselves. But the bill says you can discuss all this stuff, but as long as you do it in an objective manner, as part of an academic discussion. Okay, so a good example would be a teacher that believes in creationism, paid for by the taxpayer money, public teacher. They can't go in and teach the kids in their class that creationism is the way the world works, right? We've kind of settled this issue with the scope monkey trials, right? But they could teach what creationism is. They could talk about certain people believe, the animals were created in this order by God and in this over this period of time. But they can't pass or fail their students based on their adopting belief in creation.
Right. So you can't capitulate to a whole host of.
A public teacher doesn't have the freedom of speech to be able to indoctrinate kids about certain things. For instance, creationism. Right. So it would be the same thing with these divisive concepts, right? Some people believe that one race or sex is superior to another race or sex, but you can't divide your class along, racial lines and say, okay, now this half of the class apologize to this half of the class, and if you don't, then you fail, right?
Right.
Or you get some kind of scorn or derision.
It seems like the exact opposite direction of what Martin Luther King was.
Exactly.
And he talked about peaceful protests. We see the protests these days; they're not peaceful. They're anything but peaceful. Burning down
air quotes
places.
Peaceful, right?
I went to D.C. before the election and all that, and they were boarding up places, and they were getting ready, and they were writing, "Yeah, we believe in Black Lives Matter, so don't destroy our building." And people, it's like this is a whole new concept of what peaceful protest is. Rioting, burning down buildings—that's peaceful,
right? Well, property doesn't matter under Marxism, so there you go, right? There's another thing that the bill doesn't do. It's people say it'll ban diversity and inclusion trainings. No, the bill actually talks about diversity and inclusion trainings, and it said that those trainings shall first and foremost encourage agency employees not to judge each other by color, race, ethnicity, sex, or any other characteristic protected by
Isn't this already law?
It's already law, right? So what's happening is this critical race theory ideology is kind of coming in through diversity and inclusion training, right? So we know diversity and inclusion are a great thing, but nobody's kind of scrutinizing the curricula that these experts are using when they teach these classes. And what some of them are using are these tenets from critical race theory, that your moral character is based on how you were born, that we're not all equal, right? So it puts some guidelines on what types of diversity and inclusion.
A song comes to mind. I love music, but there's a song, "How long has this been going on?"
Yeah, yeah, right.
How long has
It's
this
been going on for, it's been creeping in for several decades, but nobody's been pushing back. Everyone's afraid to push back because they don't want to get called bad names.
Racist, yeah. So the whole anti-bullying tactic becomes a bullying tactic, which seems to be
The professional interrupter.
yeah. And apparently it was either a community college under job training where this person was learning how to be a professional interrupter.
Yeah.
And it was weird. She said, I'm a trained interrupter. And okay, that floors you right there. Okay, what does that mean? And I'm going to echo, and I'm going to educate, and I'm going to reaffirm what I said to you. And, I don't think he saw that coming. And I'm just thinking, what would I have done if somebody said that to me? If I just asked a simple question, what is this? What is this about? Why are you getting people mad at each other? What's going on here? And you're teaching my children this?
Right.
And where are the meetings happening? Just to let you know, I did ask the Commissioner Edelblut about this and about the secret meetings, and it's not within his purview or jurisdiction, but that is something for the Attorney General's office or the Secretary of State's office to investigate. I'm seeing new legislation in my mind as far as if there needs to be penalties. If you're having secret meetings on the public dime, setting agendas without the right to know, there needs to be a consequence, a serious consequence.
Right.
Because
that's not transparency, right?
It's not transparent, and you're basically influencing a whole generation of children on the taxpayer dollars to do what? To hate each other? To be judgmental. You're teaching people to judge each other. We're told us, don't judge me. I won't judge you. That type of thing. But that's exactly the opposite of what's going on.
Yep.
So
very interesting.
Anyway, I keep interrupting you.
Yeah. So I mean, I could go on, and feel free to contact me if you want to talk about it more. But the 544 doesn't limit free speech because it talks about government speech, right? So the free speech is for private citizens, protecting us in our thoughts and expression.
Right.
But if you work for the government and you're paid for by the taxpayer, you don't get to have free speech while you're on the job. In your free time, you do. But the legislature can put limits on how taxpayer dollars are spent, what kind of programs those dollars fund.
So your committee's in the House. How many people are usually in the committee?
It's about 19 or 20.
19 or 20 people.
Yeah. You guys have five per committee, and then you're on like 7 different committees or something. Right?
Yeah, we're like the Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. What was the tenure? What was the atmosphere when this was being brought forward? The hearing. How did that go?
Yeah, great question. So it came through executive departments and administration because
DNA,
that's the statutes that the bill addresses is state government agencies and institutions. And it came out of that committee along party lines. So it was 10-9, ought to pass. You can watch the testimony. It actually was 2 separate days. It was February 11th and February 18th. You can find those on YouTube. And it was about 5 hours of testimony. And, I might be biased, so maybe I'm viewing it through a different lens, but it was about 60-40 split, between favorable and unfavorable. And, a lot of different, so the opponents of the bill, when they testified, didn't actually really talk about the bill. They talked about, how they imagined the bill to be. One young woman stands out from, I think, the Concord School District. She was a high school student and, spoke very eloquently. But if you look at her Twitter profile, she considers herself a communist. So it was kind of interesting that a high school kid is a proud communist and is opposing the bill. You have to wonder what's going on in the Concord School District. Right.
And so, obviously there's tension and all that, but there's got to be a hyperbolic, terms going, hyperbole throughout the testimony. I watched the WMUR interview with you and Representative Mangiaputi.
Yeah.
And I didn't see her actually talking line by line. One of the things we do in the Senate, and I'm sure we do it in the House, You point to line 1, line 2, line 15, page 2,
Right.
RSA, this. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I saw, well, you don't know how I've been treated. And well, that might be, but number one, she was elected a number of times, so
I think 5 times. Yeah.
5 times. So, it seems like there's a good mix of people been voting for you.
Right. Right.
Indicating that there really isn't a problem. I think this is trying to create a problem where one that doesn't exist. And your bill basically protects the citizens and their children
Yeah.
from being indoctrinated.
Right, and it protects freedom of conscience.
Yes.
Right. So if you're a teacher or professor, and you're receiving employee training as part of your employment under the state, you're being funded by taxpayer dollars. It protects your freedom of conscience that you don't have to adopt or believe a set of ideas that are just antithetical to
Right.
To the American way, basically.
Right. And pox and all. I mean, we've done some really bad things in our history, and as a culture, as a nation.
But if we just focus on the bad things
Right.
and not on the wonderful, great things,
And
like the fact that America is the beacon of liberty for the whole entire world, like if we just ignore that part,
Right.
then maybe the country does look pretty bad. But
And I think it's important also that you're seeing a lot of these statues being torn down, and there's a misrepresentation as to what some of them have been there for, but they're not monuments necessarily of celebration. They're monuments of mile markers in our history. Look at this. This was bad. Look at this. This was good. And if you don't have that reference, you have no idea how to gauge history.
right, you repeat it. You're doomed to repeat it.
One of my professors used to say, not to know what was before one was is always to be a child. And it allows mass manipulation. So the exchange of ideas is important whether you agree with them or not, and you should have that freedom and freedom of conscience. I'll give you the last few words. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I guess Twitter is probably the best way. It's Rep Keith Ammon on Twitter, and feel free to reach out to me through the state website as well.
I appreciate that, and that's one of the things I do like about Zoom is the fact that this is all being recorded. All the hearings are. So instead of trusting the media, which I have a jaundiced view of them these days, look at really what was being said. Go to the YouTube, and it is on the state website, correct?
It's on the state YouTube channel.
State YouTube channel.
And again, it's EDNA February 11th and 18th. Those 2 dates, you can find all the hearings that came through the House.
Excellent. And so judge for yourself. And so I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
If you have an idea and you want to come on the show and talk about a particular bill or a situation, let us know. Until then, thanks for watching Speaking with the Senator.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.